Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sacred Flame podcast. We are now well into January, the first month of 2026, the new year. And yeah, welcome to Amina as well. Want to say hi to people, Amina?
Hi, thank you. Yes. Sorry, there's a bit of a lag on my end because I'm constantly battling with my internet. So I apologize.
The subpar Scottish internet.
It's so bad, you wouldn't believe it. But yes, welcome to 2026, everyone. We are, as Matthias said, well into January. University has started for both of us. We are just coming out of the darkest part of the year, but it doesn't quite feel like it yet. So hold
Hmm.
on just a few more weeks of this nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Over here, it kind of feels like spring, to be honest. We're still not getting any real snow. There's a little bit, laying around, but I mean, normally we would have massive blizzards, and no, it feels like we're in New Mexico or something like that at this point.
That's creepy.
It is really creepy. It's like desert climate going on right now. So yeah. How I guess it's still dreary and gray over there in Scotland.
It's dark, it's wet. We had a tiny bit of sunshine this morning, which was very nice. But for the most part, it's just quite cold and dark and
Mm.
very much not springy or New Mexico feeling.
Well, I mean, I'm glad to hear that some things at least haven't changed in this
It's,
world of chaos. Otherwise,
Mhm.
I don't know if you heard about it, but Denmark had like a foot of snow just like last week.
Yes, all of
Yeah,
Europe was pretty swamped and it really
that's
messed with
right.
trains, planes, and automobiles. Yeah,
Yes,
I
yeah,
had a friend who was stuck in the Netherlands for a week, couldn't get
mm,
out
yes.
anyway, couldn't get back to Sweden. I
Yeah,
was
yeah.
in Norway during that, and we had normal amounts of Norwegian snow, but it was bitterly cold. It was negative 17 degrees Celsius,
Oh wow,
which
that's like
I'm
what
not
it
sure what
usually.
that is.
Well, that's
Yeah.
about the same in Fahrenheit, isn't it? Like once
Yeah, once you get into the negatives, they kind of catch up with each
align.
other, but I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because like I mean that's we get that sometimes here, or we should be, but
Mhm.
no, not this time. At least not yet. Hopefully, crossing fingers that it comes soon. Yeah. Yeah, so this time around, we are talking about elves, fairies, and the fae, or whatever they're called over there in
The um the hidden folk, the fair folk, um
Huldefolk. Yeah.
Huldefolk, yeah.
Mm,
Um what else are they called? I know we had sprites. Sometimes
mm,
that's a subclass of fairy. Over here, it's commonly used to refer to the whole mess of them. Whether
mm-hmm,
you're talking about fairies, dwarves, brownies, any
mm,
kind of small landvættir or
yeah.
household vættir.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, we also have a single Icelandic source talking about the Ármaður, it's,
Mm.
the year man who,
Hmm.
which was definitely the same as as like a Vet, one of those like spirits of the land or whatever. I think it's a Islendinga book or a Landnáma book. One of them talks about like how this guy has a Ármaður that he sacrifices to in a rock, and he lives like the being lives in the rock. Um, yeah, but I mean, we're going to talk about it in, of course, a Scandinavian North Atlantic context, in a Irish, Scottish, Welsh, possibly
Mhm.
also a little bit of English, British kind of context that you're going to deliver, and then we're definitely also just going to touch upon the whole Lord of the Rings
Yeah.
synthesis of ideas of elves and all that stuff, because I think that's
Mhm.
how most people are sort of like familiar with that kind of stuff today.
Hmm.
Like, thanks to Tolkien, we have perhaps some very like set ideas nowadays about like what an elf or fairy or something like that is. That and perhaps also Disney. I don't know how much Tinkerbell has influenced people's opinion.
Dungeons and Dragons has also heavily
Yeah.
influenced elves and things, World of
But that's like
Warcraft.
derived. That stuff is derived from Tolkien though, right?
Yes, it is
Yeah.
heavily.
Yeah, so
Heavily.
so ultimately all sources lead back to him, so to speak.
Mhm.
And yeah, so what can we say about elves in Tolkien's universe? Well, first and foremost, I think the one important thing to mention is he's got like this distinction of elves versus orcs, right? And the
Mhm.
orcs are like the tormented elves or something like that. They were
Yes.
yeah subjected to torment and then became evil and all that kind of stuff. That is actually mirroring medieval folk narratives about elves that we get in Iceland, we get them in Scandinavia, maybe also the British Isles and Ireland. I'm not entirely sure, but
I
just
think
like
some of it made it into the fairy traditions over here as
yeah, just
well, where
like
you
these
do
like
get evil fairies. You get like well, in more recent times and in kind of like early modern to Victorian fairy, I don't know, nomenclature, you would kind
mhm,
of get like good fairies and bad fairies, evil fairies, fairies of like the dark court,
mhm,
which has been played upon much more in very, very recent fantasy literature. But I
mhm.
don't think it was explored quite so thoroughly in its original sources. But you do get this kind of duality of,
Good and evil,
good
yeah,
versus bad. Yeah, it's this
yeah,
very Cartesian division. And then you
yeah.
you do still have quite a few ambivalent ones, kind of like Tinkerbell is actually quite a good example of that.
Right, that's true. Yeah, yeah. No, and I mean, like th that whole like division between good and bad elves, or f fairies, or whatever we're calling them, that also boils down to medieval theology. The Elucidarius is this one of these important texts that are circulating in the 1100s in particular. It comes to Scandinavia from the British Isles.
Mhm.
So it's like known there. And this is the one that gives us this division. Talks about the division of angels and demons. Um, and so all these like folk figures, folk beings become aligned, so to speak, with that division as well. You even see it in Old Norse mythology in Snorri Sturluson's Edda when he talks about ljósalvar and dökkalvar, light
Mhm.
elves and dark elves. He's gotten that
Mhm.
straight from Elucidarius, this Christian text. Um, we see it later on in later like 19th century descriptions of the Huldufolk and elves in
Mhm.
Iceland as well, where it's sort of the story has the narrative has changed a little bit, and now it's like what is it the story about the orphaned children that Eve tried to hide from God.
Changelings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they and so they become sort of like the hidden people
Mhm.
um in like folk tales in the 19th century. So we
Mhm.
got like this division in these beings from Christian theology that then becomes sort of like a folk phenomenon several centuries after it has been introduced in sort of the higher levels of literature in the medieval period.
Yeah, well, I think that's really it's reflected a lot in the stuff that we see in kind of Victorian and Edwardian literature that deals exactly with that. The series, if you've ever heard of, I think it's Andrew Lang's fairy books, like the green fairy book, the gray fairy book, the violet fairy book. I can't remember exactly how many are in this collection, but he kind of catalogs different fairies that exist. and it's kind of a who's who of these creatures. And it's really interesting. And compendiums and dictionaries have been amassed that deal not only with the stories about these and all the folk tales surrounding these creatures or spirits, but also kind of putting them into these categories of good or bad or trickster or helpful, or are they connected to nature? Are they connected to fortune? Are they connected to magic? How can you interact with them? What are the rules surrounding them? So as time has progressed, this duality hasn't really changed very much, but there has been a clear interest in this idea of kind of personifying these different forces.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess that actually best was like where do they come from? Where do they originate, so to speak, right? Because they do definitely not look like those like floaty pointy ears thingies that we see in the Lord of the Rings, for instance.
Yeah.
They are very dissimilar from what you know from the Dungeons and Dragons universe
Mhm.
and World of Warcraft and Warhammer, whatever all of these things are called.
Mhm.
I'm too boring to know. Um,
You're too cool for this stuff, Mattia.
I'm too cool for this stuff.
No, I
Um,
think yeah,
yeah,
it's well they they didn't really take on this very noble, erudite, mystical cast until Tolkien, and that was a very deliberate choice of his. Or not
mhm,
much. Elves were usually portrayed right alongside fairies and sprites and imps as these kind of mischievous entities that were very much tied to nature.
yes, yeah, yeah, and you know, this also brings in the dwarfs, right? The
Mm.
dwarfs in Old Norse mythology, in the Germanic context, definitely the same kind of beings.
Yeah, they haven't
Uh,
really changed much, which I find
yeah,
really interesting.
yeah.
Like they
I don't
kind
know.
of like
They all just like hang out in the ground, you know. That's their thing,
yeah,
right?
they
Right?
just make stuff really
Yeah.
well.
Yes. Yeah. And they are sort of they are a kind of elf as well, you know.
Mhm.
And we have several overlaps between you know, dwarfs and elves in the sense that they are, you know, several of the dwarfs that are listed in Old Norse mythology. And going back to Lord of the Rings,
Mhm.
Gandalf is one of them. Gandalfur, he's an actual
Gandalf.
dwarf. Yeah, and
Yes.
his name means wand elf or something like that, spirit elf, depending on how you want to
How you
translate the word
translate
Gandar.
Gandr.
Yeah. So it's like so there's like an overlap there, and one of the things that's very clear is that we are supposed to find them in the ground.
Hmm.
That's like they come out of the ground. They come out of the where rocks are and that kind of stuff, right? We even like there are like folk tales in Scandinavia about how they come up. This is like a particularly creepy, bad kind of elf that comes up from the ground in the kids' room where your child is laying in the crib, and then they harass your poor little newborn baby by sucking its thumbs and stuff like that, and it's just like, "Eee, stop that."
Ugh.
Yeah. Um,
Ugh.
so we have that, right? And then of course the you know changelings too. They come and they swap your baby out with
Yes,
their own, and you can see that in different ways. You know, um, if your child has weird, strange behavior, that is because it's a changeling. You know,
obviously.
right?
Yes. And this idea of the changeling has persisted into quite recent times, where not too long ago, there was a woman in Ireland, I believe, who was actually killed by her husband and their neighbors for being thought to be a changeling. And I think it happened within like either the last century and a half or century, but more recently than is comfortable.
I could see that happening in the 80s for some reason.
Yeah, it was bizarre. It was they did all of these tests on her and they gave her certain things to eat or drink to try to prove if she was a changeling. I can't remember the actual name of the case, but it is such a pervasive part of culture. And I'd say that Ireland shares that kind of heavily enchanted culture with Iceland, where um, these beings are quite alive over there in not only in superstitious contexts, but in just kind of how people interact with the landscape over there.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's something that's, present too in certain ways across Scandinavia, less in the
Mhm.
south than in the north. And also you of course have that like uh, 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 you have two positions, I would say, that would also be in Iceland, right? Where some uh, uh, are like, well, we are modern people. We believe in reason and rationality and so on and so forth. So therefore, elves and trolls and all that stuff, that's just nonsense. That's infantile kids play or something like that. And then you have the other side who are like, oh yeah, we totally have an elf living in the closet over here, or something like that, right? Um, and there's like actually the island of Bornholm in Denmark has this like massive elf tradition, elf troll. It's a there's a little bit of confusion about like what they call them over there, but that's like a location in Denmark that where like people are still pretty much like huffed up on the
Hmm.
idea of elves, as opposed to the rest of the country that's more like stuck up about it. And it's like, no, 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 we are totally rational modern human beings. Like, sure, bro. Um, and yeah, so it's like you can like find these different attitudes throughout
Yeah.
the region, I would say. And it seems to be the same in Ireland, right?
Yeah, I mean it's still kind of I wouldn't quite call it cognitive dissonance, but there is this sense where like people are quite rational and modern and they exist very much in the modern world, but they're still not going to drink out of that well. They're still not going to go into that field after dark. Um, one of the faculty members of my department is Irish, and she was telling me just last year about how someone she knew was crossing a field at night and it got very, very misty, and he got all turned around and couldn't figure out which way he was supposed to be going. So he took off his jacket and turned it inside out, and suddenly the mist cleared and he could see his way again. And it
Yep.
was because of this kind of tradition of putting on your clothes inside out so that the Fae can't get to you or can't see
Hmm.
you, or you're
Yeah.
you're tricking them back in some way. So it's still very much ingrained in parts of it, but
Hmm.
not everyone is going around talking about fairies and elves and gnomes and such.
No, yeah, that's the thing, right? And I think that story right there actually highlights a couple of very important aspects of how this works in these traditions, right? Because the main, uh, if you're not killed by a neighbor or an animal or drowned at sea in the Faroe Islands, it would be falling off a cliff, right?
Mm.
That is the thing about the Faroe Islands.
Makes a
That's
lot of
pretty.
sense for the Faroe Islands.
Right. So you get the perfect combination of very steep rocks and a lot of mist and
Hmm.
cloudy, foggy weather, right? So, that would be a typical scenario where the elves were involved, right? This guy just disappeared. Oh, the elves took him. Well,
Yeah.
most likely scenario is that this guy lost his way in the fog and then took a wrong turn and fell down this like very, very steep, high cliff and ended up in the ocean.
Hmm.
Um, but I think elves took him, right? And it's the
Yeah.
same with, bogs in Denmark, right? Like
Yeah.
go out into the marshes. Like keep that in mind too. Also with the English landscape, there used to be a lot more marshes out there, right?
Yes.
And those marshes, they have a tendency to suck you in if you take the wrong step.
Hmm.
And again, that's like also he went that way and never came back. Well, the elves must have gotten him, right?
The elves
You
got
know?
him.
Yeah.
We actually, in the British Isles, we have a very specific word for the fairies that lead you astray in marshes. We've got will-o'-the-wisps, which
Yes. Yeah.
are specifically there to lead travelers astray in bogs and marshes and lead them
Hmm.
to their dooms. They're very well known. I think they show up in Harry Potter and the movie
Yeah.
Brave, which takes place in Scotland. So they're all over the place.
Hmm.
So this was clearly a very common occurrence.
Yeah, and this is also where they take on the shape of animals of various kinds. Like we talked about the hell horse
Mhm.
before, the nook,
Yes, the Nook
and
just dragging people into lakes. We've got
right,
Kelpies here in
yeah,
Scotland.
yes, yeah, and dogs and pigs in Denmark is a thing too.
Yeah, we've got a
Yeah,
lot of fairy dogs here too.
yeah, yeah. We got like scary bloody hounds and that kind of stuff when it comes to dogs, and we got
Mm.
shining pigs for some reason, like they're like literally glowing. So luminescent
Uh,
pigs will
Luminescent pigs is
come
pretty
and kill
good.
you in Denmark, apparently.
That's pretty spooky. We've got
Isn't
a
it?
lot of hounds, especially in England, but in I think either on an island off of Scotland or somewhere in Ireland, we have the Cooshie, which
Mm.
are fairy dogs or dog fairies. We also have the Kashi, which is a fairy cat.
Mm.
We have the Cwnanwn, the Hounds of Annwn, or the Hounds of
Mm.
Annwyn, who hunt with Arawn, the Lord of Annwyn. We've got Gabriel hounds, wished hounds, yelling hounds, the hounds of Dartmoor, which some people
Mm.
have connected to the migration of wild geese, but like all
Mm.
of these terrifying, like fairy hounds, essentially.
Yeah.
We also have a lot of stories about white stags or white hinds. So white
Yeah.
deer are all over the place.
That shows up in Denmark a little bit too, and I know
Yeah.
in Germany as well.
Yeah, I think
The Icelanders, I think, sometimes might have a fairy horse. Um,
mm,
because there are some, I don't know how pronounced it is, or sort of like built out in the folk culture, so to speak. But you get a couple of examples of folk tales where the elves have like so the usual complication is that either somebody becomes sort of like privy to elf life and the
mm,
life of the Huldufolk, right? Because they have like a parallel society, right? And so they have their own little villages and churches and all that kind of stuff. And either you end up being good friends with them because you help them out, but then you somehow trespass anyway and end up in trouble with them, or you sort of like stumble upon them. There are different variations of the folk tales, right? But in some cases, the punishment for knowing they exist, essentially, or having seen them, is that you get trampled by a horse that they send after you. Either they're riding
oh,
it themselves or they're just sort of like directing it. Which, again, speaks to general life in Iceland, basic farm
a
life in
lot of
Iceland.
horses there.
Sometimes you get your ass
Very
kicked by a
crazy.
horse in Iceland, and again, the elves probably did that as well. Now, one of the things
Yeah.
that I wanted to circle back to when it comes to like crossing a field is that in a lot of the
Mhm.
folk tales that, especially the ones that I know from Norway and Iceland, um, if you are being chased by the elves or Huldufolk or trolls, what you can do is that you can just run straight across the plow furrows in a field, because the elves or the Huldufolk, they have to follow the furrows up and down the
Oh,
field, so that way you can get away from them pretty easily, right?
that's
Otherwise,
very
they're
clever.
gonna kick you off a cliff and send you plunging into
Yeah,
the
and
waters.
then or they're gonna trample you with their horses.
Or trample you with a horse or drown you in a
Yeah,
bog or you know. So
whatever.
yeah.
Take your pick. That's really interesting. Oh, that's I never knew that that was kind of a I don't know what the word for it in English. In Irish, we would say gaish, like a condition that has been laid on them that they have to follow the plow furrows.
Yeah,
But
there's
that's
a
very
couple
cool.
of those, like, different kinds of conditions, so to speak,
Yeah.
or like, circumstances forcing sort of like some kind of behavior on them. Um,
Yes,
like
there are. You get that with a lot of supernatural things. And you also
yeah.
get that if you go into the supernatural world.
Yeah, I mean, it has something to do with the demonology of everything. This is
Hmm.
also a classical aspect of like demons that they are
Yes.
sort of like forced to do a certain kind of thing or respond in a certain way, which you also see in a whole lot of folk tales, right? Like if you say a certain
Yes.
thing, then the troll will respond this particular thing back because that's just how it works.
Yes.
One way
Or if
to
you learn someone's true name or something's true
mm,
name, then you have
hmm
to, like, Rumpelstiltskin is the most
Yes.
obvious example of that that I can think of now. Um, or like in a lot of the British Isles and Ireland fairy stories, you're not supposed to eat anything if you're in the
Yeah.
land of the fairies, otherwise you will be
hmm
trapped there.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a very common one as well. We also actually see that in some Scandinavian stories.
mm,
You see that in Saxo's story about Thorkell, who goes like to the far north
mhm,
to the land beyond the stars and the moon and the sun and all that stuff, which is the death realm.
mhm.
And there, the ones who are the people who are with him who get interested in the women there or the food there or the riches or something like that, they immediately die or go mad and
Yep.
those kinds of things. So that's a pretty common one, I would say, right? Like we also see that in that cool Spanish movie. Uh,
Pan's Labyrinth.
yeah,
I was
right.
just
Like,
thinking about that as well. Yeah. So what this one?
yeah, yeah, and that's a creepy one.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. You
but
see a lot of that in like when you were talking about not being distracted by the denizens of these realms, the sirens in the Odyssey also came to mind, where if you hear their
yes,
song, you'll go mad.
right, yeah. Isn't there something or is it just Cersei turning people into pigs, or does she turn people who have eaten her pigs into pigs or something like that? I can't remember.
I think
Or is it someone
she,
else?
she tricks them into, she feeds them something, I think, and then she
Uh-huh.
turns them into pigs.
Okay,
I
yeah.
think I haven't read the Odyssey in so long. I'm so
It's been a
sorry. What a
bit, yeah.
classic this. It's been a while.
Here we are butchering Greek mythology again.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, guy.
No, but it's a very common theme, right? That you like if you eat something or if you ingest something or if you touch something special
Hmm.
from the realm, then you become part of the realm,
Hmm.
right? Um, and I wanted to highlight one thing. There are also some folk tales that prescribe how you can figure out if somebody is a changeling.
Hmm.
There's a I think it's a Norwegian one where like this uh I think it's a mother who is pretty sure her child is a changeling. And so she makes like this weird implement where she puts a broom upside down inside a pot over the fireplace, and I think there might be another thing on top of it or something like that.
Oh
And
gosh.
and then she like leaves the room and hides, and then the child comes by and goes, "Huh, that's a weird thing." And that like exposes the child as a changeling because it's not supposed to speak.
I'd be absolutely fucked. That
Right?
would be.
Yeah, I'd also be like, hey, that's weird. Why is that there?
Mom, what are you doing? What's this all about? Yeah, a lot of the stuff. to figure out if someone is a changeling reminds me, it has a lot of echoes of finding out if someone is a witch.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's the same. It's
It's
in the same realm.
similar.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
But I always found that really interesting. And I think the stuff about the changeling is usually a lot more nebulous, but there are some things that you can look for. But it seems very to, kind of be cut from the same cloth as the stuff that you would find in Malleus Maleficarum or any kind of witch finder
Yeah.
propaganda.
Yeah, of course. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, Malleus Maleficarum, synthesizes folk
Yeah,
stuff, right?
exactly.
So,
And again,
yeah.
that just goes back to all of these kind of being rooted in this demonology idea.
hmm Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure, right? Like, and also like the sort of the communication between folk practices and individuals schooled to some degree in
Mhm.
theology, right? That's what has created a lot of these ideas overall, or perhaps universalized them,
Mhm.
to some degree, which would be the case with stuff in the Malleus Maleficarum, right? Which was
Yeah.
used throughout Europe as sort of like the textbook on witches and witchcraft, right?
Mhm.
Um, Even though, when we break that down, it's not at all universal in that sense. This is very specific folklore from very specific regions in, France
Yes.
and Italy, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, it's really interesting to think about how there is that communication back and forth because on the one hand, this is in very clearly folk material. This is
Yes.
important worldview aspects of local populations in certain regions. And then
Mhm.
that is like fed the theology. And then it responds back with, oh, this is now our version of that theology that we've gotten, right? And so,
Yeah,
yeah,
there is that really interesting feedback between the two where like the one is informed by the other and vice versa. It's very much a two-way street. And you can kind of see how local customs get, as the word you used was synthesized, and I think that's perfect, like synthesized into these kind of universal rules for these things, and then how those rules become universal and then are re-synthesized into the more local traditions based on the pre-existing traditions. And you're
yeah.
going to get these really interesting mixes and exchanges that kind of both are shaped by local tradition and in turn modify the local tradition that they get assimilated into.
Yeah, and
So
a
it's
really
really
good
interesting.
example, yeah, a really good example of this is actually the Danish witchcraft trials in
Hmm.
Jutland. So, a couple of things to know about the witchcraft trials in Denmark, right? So they happen, I would say, sort of like in the peak period of the witchcraft craze in Europe, right? So this is from like it's from the first half of the 1600s and
Hmm.
into a little past the 1650s into the 60s. That's when you have
Mm.
like the real hardcore witchcraft trials in Denmark, right? It starts with King Christian IV, who puts out this a sweeping law that basically says anything considered witchcraft is now subject to execution in 1617, and that affects Denmark and Iceland and Norway, right? Because they're
Hmm.
all under his crown at the time. But the witchcraft trials and the processes and everything take very different form depending on where you are in the realm. So there's something that happens in Jutland specifically. There's stuff that happens sort of like in the urban areas in southern in the Danish archipelago that's different from what happens in Jutland. There's stuff that happens in the west coast of Norway that's different from what happens in Denmark, and there's stuff that happens in northern Norway that's different from what happens in the west coast, and blah 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 back and forth. And of course, Iceland is its own thing with,
Yeah.
primarily men being executed for
Hmm.
witchcraft, right? So there's a lot of different things happening. But one of the cool, or yeah, it's a cool thing. I don't know, like it was the genocide on a bunch of people is cool. That's not what I mean here, but one really interesting thing about what happens in the Jutland cases in the early ones is that, you know, the center of the Malleus Maleficarum problem with witchcraft is the pact with the devil. That these supposed witches have made a deal with the devil, sold their souls, so to speak, and they're communing with him.
Hmm.
Now, this typically happens on a distant mountain. In Germany, it's called Blocksberg. In Sweden and Norway, Denmark, to some degree, it's called Blåkulla. Like some kind of distant place, maybe an island or maybe out in the woods. That's a typical French thing, right?
Hmm.
That you find them out
Yes.
in the woods. But in the Danish cases, in the Jutlandic Danish cases, the situation is that it happens in church. Right, so first and foremost, they didn't get the memo that this is supposed to happen in the wild.
Bit counterintuitive. They're
Yes.
like, well, well, yeah,
Well,
they'll be in the church, the most like
yeah.
the epicenter of this
Well, I mean, maybe it says
cultivation of
something about
the
our opinions about church. I don't
yeah.
know. The other thing
Like
that's
weird shit
really
goes on there
interesting,
all the time, so may as
yes,
well.
yeah. The other thing that's really interesting, and this is where it ties back into elves, is that in the early trials, the accusation is often that the pact uh, and the coven and all that kind of stuff, it takes place in the church, and the person who perpetrated here made a deal with the little guy. Like that's literally what he's
Ah.
called, the little man, the lad, right? And these are the same kinds of epithets we attribute to the Nisse, the Tomte, the
Yeah.
elves,
The
dwarfs, and
little
so on.
people, the little
Yes,
folk, all of
the
this.
hidden
Yep.
people. Yeah, so it looks like the original sort of like Danish idea around doing witchcraft, right? Or again, I keep saying Danish. I mean Jutlandic because Jutland
Mm,
and Denmark aren't the same thing. Let's
sure.
just keep that in mind. Um, uh, uh, the Jutlandic, the original Jutlandic idea is that witchcraft is something you do with the elves, right? And it seems to be very clearly expressed in these um, early stories. What happens later on is that like these inquisitors and clergy and judges and all those people involved who are familiar with the theology and demonology that you get in the Malleus Maleficarum,
Mhm.
they start like moderating people and start telling them, no, no, no. When you talk about the little man, you must be talking about the devil. You must be talking about the Baphomet, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what it says. You make pacts with him according to the Malleus Maleficarum. So
Hmm.
you must be mistaken. He can't be a small dude. He must be a regular goat guy like the one we know, right?
Right, exactly. Well, I think that that conflation can also be seen in some British traditions as well, where cunning men or cunning women who were people who were understood to have some kind of relationship with fairies or with land tide spirits and have a good relationship with them, and that's where all of their knowledge came from, were often tried as witches and they were targeted as users of witchcraft or having formed pacts with the devil. But the local population kind of understood them to have a relationship with these little folk or the little guys. And
Hmm.
so that both distinction and conflation is also quite prevalent in other places. And so I think it's really interesting that it manifested in Jutland as much
Hmm.
over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it like you can sort of look at those traditions as sort of similar to or related to what you see further south in Germany with the Klabautermann.
Yes.
Um,
Hmm.
these mining spirits, for instance, that people fear
Mhm.
in the Ruhrgebiet, that whole industrial area of Germany. Once they start digging for coal, right? Um, and this also goes back to the peat digging in the bogs, right, where
Mhm.
you find, as I talked about before, those poor souls who got sucked into a marsh at some point. Some of them may also have been sacrificed to it here and there, in ancient
Yeah,
times.
we love a bog body.
Yes, right. And
Loads of
then
bog bodies in Denmark and the British Isles.
yes, right. And then, you get into the 19th century, maybe even in the 1700s for a little bit. And we need fuel. And so we're digging through the marshes and the bogs and digging up this like nice peat, right, that we can use for fuel. And then we all of a sudden we run into that like distant ancestor who got sucked into the marshes, and we're like, oh, Scheiße, das ist der Klabautermann, right? It's the that like creepy elf man or whatever we call him.
Das ist der
So
Ölkönig.
the Erlkönig. So, so this is like how that also like ties together as sort of um, when it comes to the bogs, right? You see that layer of mist out there
Mhm.
hanging over them at certain times of year, right? And
Oh, yes.
in Denmark, we call that the bog lady's brew, right? Because she's like,
Ah,
yeah, she's brewing, and then the
she's
mist
brewing the
comes.
mist.
Yeah.
Because in Goethe's Der Ölkönig, he also talks about the strip of fog. So for those of you who don't know the poem, there's basically a father riding with haste through dark woods at night with his very, very sick child, and his child is narrating to him these visions of this mysterious elf king that he's seeing and hearing and experiencing. And the father keeps reassuring him that it's perfectly normal things. So the son recognizes the fog as the Elf King's mantle, his beautiful cloak that's trailing behind him as he processes through the woods. And the father says, mein Sohn, das ist ein Nebelstreif. Like
Mhm.
that's a strip of fog. So this idea of fog, and which is by definition very obfuscating and
Mhm.
obscuring, it is tied with these rather mysterious entities that we don't really know much about and that we have a lot of careful rules about interacting with. So it's very interesting that it's called what was it? The Bog Woman's Brew.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
I think in Sweden and Norway, in some cases, it like that mist also becomes, the associated with elves and
Mhm.
in some capacity. I've at least seen, much later sort of like depictions of
Mhm.
elves and fairies and stuff like that as that kind of mist in
Yes.
19th and 20th century literature. So I don't know how deep that goes, but what we so speaking to that, right? So going back to Saxo's history of the Danes and his story about that trip to the north beyond the
Mhm.
star and moon and all that stuff, right? This is where our traveler here, who is actually a human version of Thor,
Mhm.
um, he runs into Gudmundur, this strange giant or whatever he is, who rules in other stories in like different Icelandic sagas. He rules this place called Gleisisvellir, Gleisisvöllur, right? So the shining plains or something like
Mhm.
that. And there are a couple of Icelandic versions of that story as well.
Mhm.
One called Thorstein's Daughter Bayamangs. And Bayamangs means something like uh big as a house or mighty and strong as a house or something like that. And he's again sort of like a Thor figure, like a human version of Thor, who goes to the north and um these stories, these are like later sagas where mythological locations have sort of been placed in our world. So he goes to Jotunheimar,
Hmm.
um, and um there's so much elf lore, so to speak, like operating in these stories. The first thing that happens once he gets to these strange distant lands is that he sees a dwarf standing next to a rock, who is like crying. And like the description of the dwarf is that like he's got his mouth wide open and his nose is like weirdly bent down the side of his face. Like it's like bleh. Um and he's crying because there's an eagle that has stolen his kid. Uh so,
Oh,
yeah. So
that's really sad.
Thorstein just like manages to take down the eagle and bring the kid back, and
Good.
then he gets the favor of the dwarf, and the dwarf stands behind next to a rock because dwarves live in rocks, right?
Yes.
And what we also see in other stories, right, are dwarfs may sometimes lure you into their rock. Um,
Yes.
so that's something that happens in the saga of
Hmm.
the Inglings, for instance, to one of the poor early Swedish kings and
Yeah.
Norwegian kings. But later on, Thorstein progresses, and he gets to a moment where he crosses fog. Sometimes it's a river too, but there's usually fog involved as well. And that's when he then crosses into that other world where he sees like these like massive feasts, and everybody is
Hmm.
having a fantastically good time, and this is totally the elf kingdom, so to speak, right? Just like in this, later Icelandic version. And then, he ends up having to go do a bunch of tests at Gera, this hall over there, and all that kind of stuff. Um,
Hmm.
but it's just fascinating to see how this like elf lore, so to speak, has just become part of the sort of the Icelandic literature in a very like and Danish for that matter too, because Saxo is also riffing on all of
Yeah.
this, right? And with Saxo's story in particular, it's about actually the conversion, or so the early moves towards conversion to Christianity in
Hmm.
Denmark. Um, so so that's also part of this whole thing. Like I think a lot of us nowadays have a tendency to think about elves and those kinds of beings, trolls, dwarfs, and so on, as associated with something we consider some kind of like quote unquote low mythology versus
Mm.
a high mythology that has to do with like
Right.
gods and that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And that's because of, scholarship, essentially, like academics
Yeah.
from the 1950s
Yes.
that like to make those distinctions. But that's not how that has worked out at all in historically. And
No, not really. Even in early when the field of folklore studies and mythology were really kicking off, and they were rooted mostly in philology and linguistics, there wasn't a lot of distinction between folk tales and mythology. They were getting their mythology from the folk tales and vice versa. There was some slight distinction based on the source material, but a lot of it was kind of lumped together. Like if you read any of Jakob Grimm's stuff, you'll see Odin right alongside um like Headless Horseman. So it wasn't as divided or strictly categorized as you see it today, as it was evolving.
no, and that's another thing. Like a good example of this is the Nine Herbs charm.
Hmm.
talking about the English stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
this is like Odin animating an army of plants,
Hmm.
right? That sounds like some elf stuff right there, if you ask
That's
me.
some elf shit. That's some Lothlorien shit going on
Right? Yeah.
there.
Like that's, you know, that's not that like distant king of the gods who sits up
Right.
there being
No.
completely untouchable and all that stuff, right? That's like he's more of a Tom Bombadil or a Radagast or something like that, right?
Right, exactly. Well, you also see figures from mythology either being recast or included in, or kind of a version of them appearing in fairy stories quite often. Like there's a more people are probably familiar with Queen Maeve or Queen Mab, the fairy queen, than they are with Queen Meditha or Queen Maeve of the Ulster cycle. So it's really interesting to see how some of these characters can be iterative depending on where in mythology, legend, or folklore they appear.
Hmm.
And so I think far from marking those distinctions, I think that shows how blurred those lines really are.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think at the end of the day, it probably comes from this like expectation that if, if the being, the figure has the epithet God,
Right.
then it's like it's not touched by the everyday things and
Mm.
experiences of humans, right?
Mhm.
Whereas the other beings, right, they are sort of like much more enmeshed in that experience, so
Right.
to speak, right? They are
Yeah.
sometimes the cause of the experience for us, right?
Hmm.
And even sort of like involved with some of the less glorious versions of that experience, like
Hmm.
you know. And that's it doesn't look like that has really been the theme though, in sort of pre-Christian times. um I mean, there are some interesting and nebulous things going on too
Hmm.
when it comes to that like pre-Christian tradition, right? Because we can see like first and foremost, we have to ask ourselves, why do we have so much terminology around these beings?
Right.
Like, why is there elf and dwarf and huldur and fae and fairy and
See,
right? And
consulting my dictionary of
yes.
fairies.
Um, at the end of the day, I think that is because, you know, when people are just out there doing their thing, right? They will come up with their own terminology. They will come up with a terminology that is meaningful based on, their own frame of experience. Yes, you found something interesting?
I just turned to a random page and it's an entry on buttery spirits,
Yes. Buttery
which is so
spirits, of
important because you need spirits to help you make the butter or it won't the whey and the
course.
butter won't separate. Yeah.
Yeah. And you
They've
also have
got
to give them butter,
you do. Yeah,
Yeah.
they worked hard for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, sorry.
Yes. So like people are out there doing their everyday thing, right? And then for whatever internal logic in their minds between the little community that exists out there in the world, right? A certain term, a word is being applied
Hmm.
to the spirit that they are experiencing, right? And so that that can be Hulder, because
Hmm.
that means hidden people. And it's like, yeah, we can't see them. They're all around, though. We feel them, we experience them. This is our understanding of existence. So they're right here, but we can't see them, so we call them hidden people. Duh. That makes a lot of sense, right?
Hmm.
Um, older terminology is the term elf, right? The term elf is one of the oldest terms that we have in Northwestern Europe for any kind of quote unquote supernatural being, right? It,
Hmm.
it goes straight back to Indo-European times. It means something like white or shiny or something like that, and that
Hmm.
mirrors also our word for gods, right? In Indo-European, the Indo-European root that produces Deus in Latin, which means God, right? And also produces Tiwas in Germanic, which
Yeah,
becomes
Mathias,
Tyr,
yeah.
which is a deity, right? That also means something like shining or something like
Hmm.
that. So there's like a very distinct idea there of like what this is. This like supernatural phenomenon that we're dealing with here. This is like shining and luminous. Uh, all of a sudden, the luminous pigs from Danish folklore pop into my
There you
mind, but
go.
that's a different
Makes
conversation,
perfect sense.
right? That probably has something to do with, the sky, with water, right? Because those are some main focal points we see in Indo-European traditions.
Hmm.
This is why we find so much cool stuff in lakes everywhere in Europe,
Yes.
and also Asia for that matter, right?
Yep.
Because so much stuff has been sacrificed to the spirits in water, right?
Hmm.
Um, and water has like connotations that have to do with like shining and light as well.
Hmm.
Um, and a good example of that would be the Apicitarium Nordmanicum, the what I call the Danish rune poem, which literally references the L rune as Lacus de Leoto, which means uh, water or lake, the shining. So
Hmm.
it's a consistent theme, right? And elves play a role in that as part of those like shining beings, right?
Hmm.
And then we have the word dwarf, which is um I don't think there's a good terminology for it. Sorry, etymology for it when it comes down to it.
No, it's because it's dvergar or dvergar.
Hmm. Yeah.
And but I'm not sure I've seen that word actually broken down and explained in terms of roots or origins.
No, no, I think the closest we get is sort of like the idea of a root that means short, so something
Yeah,
short, a short
diminutive.
piece, yeah,
Mm,
um, small, right? So again, that fits
little
with,
guy.
yeah, little guy. That
A
fits
little
with
guy.
all the other conceptions that we have
Absolutely
around these
does.
beings, right?
Oh, okay.
But otherwise, I don't know if there's anything satisfying when it comes to like the
Mm-mm.
explanation of that word. Um, And yeah, Huldefolk would be the other one, and
Mhm.
do we have other important terms that are applied to them? Mm, fairy, fae.
Yeah, fairy, fae. You get fae kind of shares a word in English at least with something that can mean wild or untamed or not of the cultivated world. So that when it's used as an adjective, that's when it means when it's used as a noun. So the fae, spell it however you want, because there's
Mm.
still to this day no standardized proper spelling of fairy or
Oh, that's
fae.
interesting.
Yeah, sometimes people will leave in extra A's or E's. Sometimes it's Faerie. Sometimes it's Fairy. Sometimes it's Fae or Fay or Fey. Uh, that is usually how you'd see the adjective written. Fay is usually the noun, or Fae is usually the noun. But there's so many different iterations of Fae and Fairy that it's you can kind of just take your pick.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's actually quite fascinating. I like that.
Mhm.
I like I like when diversity like that appears.
Yeah, it persists and it really, I mean, I work with medieval manuscripts a lot, and so I've gotten quite used to seeing very loosey-goosey spelling conventions,
That's the
or no
thing.
spelling conventions, and you just have to think, okay, well, this is how they're choosing to spell that 17-letter Old Irish word. That's fine. But it's always fun to find examples of that today in a world where things are very standardized. So yeah,
Yeah.
fairy and fae are still a bit flexible in that way.
I mean, that's a really good point, and that that's something I feel like everybody needs to remember about like medieval literature, and that, the spelling can be all over the place.
Yes. I'm looking at two examples of the four books I have in front of me. One is Briggs Dictionary of Fairies, spelled Fairies, and the other is The Fairy Queen, spelled Faeriequeene.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's just no standardization whatsoever.
No.
But
That's perfect. Yeah. No,
mhm.
so and this I think this brings us to the subject of sort of like their trickster qualities, right? So one of the
Yes,
things that, makes them tricksters, or trickstery or tricky, I guess, um, is definitely that we just don't know the rules of engagement, right? Like, so the best
right.
example would be if you're in the land of the fairies, right? And you don't know the rule that, oh, if you eat something, you belong to them, right? Then that's a tricky thing.
Yeah.
Uh, but otherwise, like, what is it that makes them? Why are they so tricky? What? I mean, why? Can you
Well, a
explain
lot
that?
of them are seen as ambivalent, and I think that goes back to a lot of their connections with unseen natural forces as well. When nature is a bit ambivalent or even indifferent to humans, it can like it giveth and it taketh away.
Hmm.
Same with the fairies, depending on how you interact with them. And they have rules for being in our world as well. For example, if you steal a Selkie's seal skin, then she can't turn back into a seal, and that's how you
That's
get
right.
to marry her.
Hmm.
If you manage to trap a fairy with silver or iron, then they have no power against those metals, or sometimes
Mm.
the cross comes into it. But so certain materials that we find perfectly benign are anathema to them. And
Hmm.
you can, finding out their name is a big one. You can control them in different ways. So they have just as many rules for existing in our world as we do in existing in theirs. Whether that's,
Right.
so we can't eat what they serve us. We can't make any deals with them. We can't agree to anything. And that's, I think, kind of demonstrating this ambivalence and indifference that we feel from natural forces that could be embodied by these entities, or this can be just an example of the kind of attempt to negotiate with other worlds or underworlds.
Mm.
You see this all the time with fairies setting you tasks or helping you with tasks. Again, Rumpelstiltskin comes to mind. Kulik and Olwen, a story from the Mabinogion, also comes to mind. What, as you mentioned, our hero has to perform a load of tasks in order to get something from the ruler of this
Mm.
realm. In Kulik and Olwen, Kulik wants to go marry this beautiful woman, Olwen, but her father is a giant, and he sets Kulik these impossible tasks that Kulik can only accomplish with the help of Arthur.
Mm.
So it's these kinds of rules of engagement and getting locked into contracts and very weird mannerisms are very pervasive in a lot of these tales. So I think that is just different negotiations between this world and their world, whether that their world is the land, the far north, whether it's Ausgarður, whether it's Hell, whether it's Elysium or Tir na Nog or Anuvin, there are all of these different rules that apply to us existing there and their denizens existing here.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, right? Like that's how it works in any interaction between beings, right? Like
Mhm.
this is also the experience of going to a foreign country, or
Yeah, exactly. Anytime you leave the center and go to the periphery, or the
Hmm.
periphery comes into your center,
Hmm.
things have to take on a very kind of odd rule system.
Yeah, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I like that. Yeah. Yeah, so it's not because they're trying to mess with us. It's literally just because like there are just different rules for existing over there, or there are different rules for engagement with that particular being
Hmm.
than you would otherwise expect. And sometimes, you know, you get caught in the crosshairs of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
But
that makes
it's really
sense.
interesting. I highly recommend everyone to go read many, many, many stories of fairies and folk tales and interesting things. Like
Oh
every
yeah.
single culture has loads of these stories, and they're all really interesting.
Yeah,
And you'll
yeah.
start to see lots of reoccurring themes and tropes throughout them, which is always very fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that is true. You know, that people have generally conceptualized these in the same manner
Yeah.
across cultures, across the world. Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the cool things about it too, right? Um, it's and this brings us back to like why. So we bring that up a lot, actually, right? This subject of like, oh yeah, you see that across cultures, you see that across populations, continents, and
Mhm.
so on, and the question is, of course, why?
Yeah.
Why does that
Why?
happen? Well, I mean, first and foremost, cognitively, modern humans are very similar across the planet. There's little to no distinction. And secondly, it is in like when it comes to, for instance, understanding the world is inhabited by beings with intent and all that stuff. That is in our biology. This is how we function as human beings. This is
Mhm.
um, the core of religion as well, right? And so where does that come from? And evolutionary scholars tend to suggest that it it is literally a sort of a reward for being observant and anxious. Our, our our earliest ancestors, if the bush moves, essentially, right, their immediate assumption would be something's in that bush, and it does
Danger. Yeah.
exactly, and it doesn't matter if there was anything in the bush or not. It's if there was, you are likely saved by having gotten out of there as quickly as possible. If there wasn't, no harm, no foul, right?
Hmm.
Essentially, right? So over time, our brains have simply evolved to assume that anything in our world is like inhabited by beings with intent, right? So that means um, that we of course recognize and can interact with beings that do have intent. Getting eaten by a tiger is also an interaction.
Yeah.
It might be a finite one, so to speak, but it's an interaction. Um, uh, and in the same way, seeing something out of the side of your eye because there's like movement in a tree or something like that, and you assume that that is a being, that falls into that same category. And so does the assumption that everything in this world has spirit, right?
Hmm.
And so it is the core of our existence to approach the world like that. And so that also means then that it's perfectly natural and reasonable to assume that you have elves everywhere, people. Keep that in
Yes,
mind.
absolutely. And this
Mhm.
this animacy, this kind of enchantment of the world, assuming everything has intent and spirit, also serves to remind us of our place in it and
Mhm.
kind of where we sit on this relational network between us and the rest of the world and the rest of the things who live in it with us. And these
Exactly.
stories serve to hold that knowledge in them and serve as either instruction manuals or cautionary tales or very good or very bad examples of people who have interacted successfully or unsuccessfully with these forces.
That is the thing, yes. That is a really important thing. Like the didactic aspect of these
Hmm.
stories with elves and fairies and so on, right? They typically tell you something really important about existing in the world. Going back to the
Hmm.
Faroese cases, right? It's like that is
Don't walk
literally a
off a
story.
cliff in the fog.
Yeah, yeah. Be mindful if you're in the
Yeah.
fog. Maybe just wait it out if you have
Hmm.
to, so you don't fall off a cliff, so you don't get pushed off of a cliff by
Yeah.
an elf. Don't walk into the marshes unless you know exactly what you're doing, and
Yeah.
so on and so forth, right? So yeah, it's in that sense, it's these are important cautionary tales, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
don't eat strange things in an underworldly kingdom.
Yes. Bad idea.
Bad idea for so many reasons.
Yeah. Know exactly who you're dealing with and
Yes.
just be as informed and courteous as possible if you don't.
All right.
Oh,
So
well.
we're coming up on an hour, I think, of talking about elves and the hidden folk and all that kind of stuff. Um, and I think it's a good point to wrap up. Amina, what do we have on schedule for future episodes for this podcast?
We have some really exciting guests coming up. Sean Parry of Sacred Knot Tattoo in Llandudno, Wales, is going to be joining us for our next episode, and we are really excited to record with him. We have a few other very exciting guests coming up in the next couple of weeks that we're very excited about. Ruben from Heilung is going to join us to talk about some very interesting archaeological and thematic topics. And then is Maria joining us as
Yes,
well?
yes, we have
The end of
Maria
the month?
from
Yeah.
Heilong in her new project Songlaker, um
Songlaker. It looks
joining
so
us with
cool.
the other musicians from Songlaker coming on as well. So we're very much looking
Hmm.
forward to that. That's the schedule far into February at this point. So
Hmm. Yeah.
everybody keep your eyes peeled, your ears out, and stay tuned.
And
And
as always, if you have any suggestions for topics that you want us to cover or suggestions for guests, we are always open to them. So just let us know in the comments.
mhm,
And yeah, follow
yeah,
us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. Become a patron on Patreon if you like what we're talking about and you want to support us. And you can find us wherever you get podcasts normally. We're everywhere.
yes. Yeah, and you can see our pretty faces on YouTube too if you really feel like it.
Yes, I always forget about YouTube. I don't know why. How embarrassing.
Yeah, I don't know. It's the one channel where you can see me pick my nose. So all right,
Oh,
everybody, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.
thanks for listening. Bye.